Welcome to your number story channel. If you like the channel, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The Haunting of Hill House, 1940s, Pennsylvania. Craving a fresh start, the Crane family relocated to the looming Hill House in 1945, dismissing the ominous rumors of its haunted past as mere folklore. But from their first night, a malevolent presence made its vile intentions known. Night after night, an invisible force tormented them. Strange noises like footsteps and blood-curdling screams reverberated through the halls. Doors slammed on their own accord. Household objects levitated and hurtled across rooms, narrowly missing their targets. Most disturbing were the ghastly apparitions, hellish figures manifesting from the shadows, exuding an aura of malice. No matter where they fled within the house's winding corridors, the evil pursued them relentlessly, feeding on their fear. Just as the Cranes teetered on the brink of madness, outside help arrived, but it proved too little, too late against such an ancient, intelligent evil. Defeated, the broken family fled into the night, vowing eternal silence to shield others from the horrors they endured. The Myrtles Plantation curse, 1820s, Louisiana. Deep in Louisiana's sweltering heartland, the Myrtles Plantation was a monument to antebellum grandeur in the 1820s. But beneath its opulent facade, the unjust execution of a slave named Chloe birthed a lingering evil with horrific consequences. Accused of poisoning her owners, the young Chloe was hanged on the plantation grounds, steadfastly proclaiming her innocence until her last breath. Soon after, paranormal activity plagued the estate, handprints seared into mirrors, furniture repositioned by invisible forces, and Chloe's anguished screams echoing through the halls. The family's desperation escalated as the daughter began exhibiting signs of possession, violently contorting and channeling Chloe's tortured voice through her small frame. When the manifestations reached a fever pitch, the family's last resort was an exorcism. Unfortunately, Chloe's spirit proved too powerful to tame. As the final words were uttered, objects started flying uncontrollably until the exhausted minister collapsed. The haunting only intensified after the failed exorcism, ultimately forcing the family's retreat. Chloe's unfinished business on the mortal plane persists to this day, an eternal lament for the injustice of her execution. The Stanley Hotel's ghostly inhabitants, 1910s, Colorado. Start, high in the Rocky Mountains, the Stanley Hotel's imposing architecture was eclipsed only by its bone-chilling legend. Tales of its supernatural residents stretched back over a century, etching a haunted legacy that drew thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts alike. From the start, its macabre mystique was apparent, garish spirits wandering the halls, strange noises puncturing the night, cold spots dispersing randomly. Perhaps the most alarming encounter was the apparition witnessed in the hotel's grand concert hall. As a pianist played an upbeat tune for a small audience, an elegant woman manifested on stage, standing silent and shrouded in mist. She stared hauntingly until the stunned musician stopped, only to disappear moments later. When staff felt a presence return, they detected the scent of pomegranates, believed to be the specter's calling card. Not just constrained to public areas, the haunting bled up into guest quarters as well. Visitors reported their belongings being rifled through and repositioned as if someone, or something, was watching. Others awoke to the sound of phantom children laughing and running havering down the corridors. On the hotel's grounds, a separate malicious entity lurked, a vaguely humanoid creature witnessed skulking through the thick forestation before retreating into the darkness beyond. The Lauri Mansion horrors, 1830s, Louisiana. In the heart of New Orleans' affluent French Quarter stood the lavish Lauri Mansion, home to one of America's most affluent families in the 1830s. But their immense wealth and opulence was a thin veil, concealing a chamber of unspeakable horrors that would birth one of history's most malevolent hauntings. On April 10, 1834, a fire broke out at the mansion, revealing the sadistic torture of the Lauri slaves. Emaciated bodies were shackled to the walls, some with their mouths stuffed to muffle their screams. Others had been mutilated in incomprehensible ways. In all, 7 slaves were discovered barely clinging to life amidst the macabre scene. From that fateful day, the Lauri's former home transcended from an architectural jewel to a cursed abode. Neighbors began reporting anguished howls emanating from within its walls. Those who ventured inside found rooms drenched in blood splattered with no visible source. The list beverage ghastly apparitions of disfigured slaves, their bodies twisted in agony, lurked in every shadow. Over the coming decades, most who took residence in the blighted manor found themselves descending into fits of madness and violence, some even resorting to self-mutilation mirroring the brutality the Lauris inflicted. Repeated exorcisms proved futile against the pervasive presence of the tormented slaves. Throughout it all, their anguished screams persisted as a furious lament for the justice violently denied them in life. The Ridges Asylum Torment, 1880s, Ohio, start, atop a foreboding hill in Athens, Ohio. The dilapidated remains of the Ridges Asylum still loom as a grim vestige of malfeasance and suffering on an unimaginable scale. Behind its cracked walls, beguiling evil still dwells, the anguished spirits of the tormented souls who perished within. From its inception in the 1880s, the Ridges was awash in malpractice, patients lobotomized without anesthesia, children subjected to primitive electroshock therapy, botched medical procedures mutilating and killing scores under the guise of treatment. Those who survived still lacked any semblance of peace in death. Their anguished cries can still be heard echoing through the asylum's decaying recesses. Ghastly apparitions materialize at random, orderlies brandishing barbaric medical instruments, children wailing as they relieve excruciating procedures. In the gloom, spectral figures lumber with lumbering gaits, their forms contorted into unnatural, inhuman shapes. The surrounding grounds offer no reprieve either. At night, a harrowing woman's scream pierces the veil, corroborated by countless witnesses. Some speculate she was a patient who endured unusually sadistic torture before meeting her end. Others believe her wails are an amalgamation of every soul who suffered within those nightmarish halls given chilling voice. To encounter the Ridges Asylum is to peer into the blackest depravities of the human psyche through a paranormal lens. Those who shut its doors behind them are forever haunted by the evil they let escape. The Villisca Axe Murder House, 1912, Iowa. In the quiet village of Villisca, Iowa on June 10, 1912, an act of unimaginable depravity shattered the town's idyllic peace, forever imprinting the address with a legacy of evil no spiritual cleanse could ever fully expunge. That fateful evening, an intruder crept into the charming white bungalow home with an axe and slaughtered the entire Moore family, husband, wife, their 4 children, and 2 younger overnight guests. When discovered the next morning, the bloodbath was so grotesque that experienced officers swiftly evacuated the crime scene out of sheer horror and revulsion. A century later, that ancestral house still stands, the stains of the murders seemingly absorbed into its very foundations. From the outset, paranormal activity manifested with a vengeance, as if the disrupted souls of the victims were outraged at their cruel demise. Neighborhood children often claimed glimpsing the worried faces of the Moore children peering from the upstairs windows as darkness fell. Others spoke of hearing their muffled laughter echoing throughout the home, only to trail off into a piercing shriek of terror before cutting out completely. The ambience alone was suffocating, an inexplicable dread permeating every room as the presence of the unsolved atrocity lingered. Attempts to communicate with the spirits via seances produced nightmarish results. Objects flew violently, Ouija boards spelled obscenities, participants collapsed unconscious only to awaken drenched in their own vomit. As if the children's malevolent ghosts themselves were revolted by the investigators' audacity toward their domain. The Winchester Mystery House, 1880s, California. Sarah Winchester's foolhardy crusade to placate the anguished spirits she believed were haunting her family began innocuously enough in 1884. But her obsessive construction of the labyrinthine Winchester Mystery House only fanned the flames of the malicious paranormal forces she sought to escape. Sarah lived with a perpetual guilt. Her family's extravagant fortune was built on the countless victims of her late husband's firearm empire. She grew convinced that to placate the spirits of those killed by the Winchester rifles, she had to continuously build them a colossal mansion for eternity, no matter how illogical the architectural plans became. Every night until her death in 1922, construction persisted unabated, resulting in the sprawling, nonsensical 160-room abode. Over time, the expensive proposition only fed the ever-present malevolent specters that lurked on the premises. Some were allegedly the rifle victims themselves, out for revenge against the Winchester fortune. Others were Dybbuk, demons invisibly following Sarah from her worldwide travels. The haunting only intensified with the ceaseless cacophony of hammering, drilling, and sawing. Apparitions increasingly appeared throughout the property, sightings of workers who met grisly deaths on site, like plunging into the home's pit from a scaffolding collapse. Now functioning as a tourist attraction, employees and guests alike still report objects mysteriously disappearing and plaster raining down from walls that should have no breach. In a twisted flourish, Sarah's eternal darkness manifested, tormented by the very spirits she sought to placate. The Lemp Mansion tragedy, 1900s, Missouri. For the Lemp family, their stately St. Louis mansion was both an architectural jewel and cursed abode haunted by their lost legacy. Their opulent dwelling witnessed success build the Lemp brewing empire, and slowly unravel into ruin under supernatural influences. In 1901, Frederick Lemp inexplicably shot himself in his upstairs bedroom, the same room where his son William would later take his own life, succumbing to whispers only he could hear telling him to take the bullet route. More suicides followed amongst the men until bankruptcy crippled the family's brewery business. But even in financial destitution, the Lemps were never alone within their home's once lavish confines. Strange sounds of phantom footsteps wandered the halls at night. Doors slammed shut on their own accord, heavy furniture pulled across rooms with no visible presence behind the motion. Throughout the evening darkness, the childlike laughs of phantoms echoed down vacant corridors. When illuminated, apparitions of deceased Lemp patrons manifested like living corpses, bullet holes gaping with streaks of dried blood, peering ominously at the living ensconced in their ancestral home. The tragedy proved inescapable. William Lemp's son Charles went insane, convinced his father's ghost materialized wherever he went, perched in corners with empty sockets constantly watching him. When Charles turned his rifle on his dog to break its perceived possession, he ultimately ate his own bullet too. Even the Lemp Mansion's current owner, who purchased the estate as their private residence, has recounted awakening nightly to the creaking of a rocking chair where nothing living resides. The Whaley House haunting, 1850s, California. No antique in San Diego's Whaley House conceals more restless spirits than the property itself. From its darkened foundations built atop the hanging grounds of Yankee Jim Robinson, it has been a beacon birthing otherworldly inhabitants for over 170 years. For the Whaley family, who first constructed the residence in 1857, their dream home quickly devolved into a nightmare. Knocks echoed through the walls at all hours from unseen presences. At night, their daughters recounted hearing something heavy ascending the steps only to find nothing on the landing. Windows and cabinets would suddenly fly open with enough force to snap their hinges from invisible gusts of paranormal energy. And descending near the property's eerie cistern, a ghostly apparition of a rope hanging from the rafters often materialized before vanishing into mist. Though Yankee Jim Robinson was a likely source after his defiant spirit allegedly refused to vacate his execution site, the most notorious haunter lingered around the southern portion of the abode. Whaley himself witnessed the frightening figure skulking near the house's theater room, a woman adorned in a flowing crimson robe and tarnished lace head to toe. Though she disappeared upon direct eye contact, all described her horrifying stare that seemed soulless and inhuman. Within the wall seethes even more specters, from the brothel owner Violet and her pimp, to the countless victims of Yankee Jim's drunken robberies and misdeeds. All trapped within the hallowed foundations, leaving terror and hopelessness to enshrine the estate. For the Whaley family and anyone residing after, their dream home was inescapably cursed the moment they disturbed Jim Robinson's grave. The Sally House possession, 1900s, Kansas. In the unassuming town of Atchison, Kansas, a modest residence conceals one of history's most malicious hauntings, the tormented demon of Sally, a young servant girl brutalized within its very walls over a century ago. Legend holds that in the early 1900s, Sally was viciously abused by her employers, the Finkbeaners, beaten, overworked, and suffering unimaginable cruelties. When she finally passed from the inhumane conditions, her aggrieved spirit lingered, furious over how her innocence was defiled and unwilling to ever abandon the house that witnessed her suffering. From the moment new owners in the 1990s moved in furniture, unexplained scratches besieged their belongings, streaking the walls with gashes that seemed raked by inhuman fingers. Ghostly voices whispered in rooms where no one living spoke, invoking the specter of the young servant girl pleading hoarsely for help that never arrived in life. And at night, the unmistakable sound of a frail child weeping pierced the darkness, sobbing that chillingly shifted to gleeful cackling before falling ominous silent. But Sally's most insidious method of torment was possession itself. One by one, every resident allegedly exhibited signs, objects sailing across rooms with no propulsion, hoarse growling from otherwise serene family members, scratches bearing into their flesh in the shapes of hellish symbols. Most would awaken abruptly in darkness from fever dreams plagued by the hideous decomposing visage of a ghostly child lurking at their bedside. Through it all, Sally's resentful malice endures, fueled by her thirst for vengeance on every soul residing where her childhood innocence disintegrated into tragic demise. Those who cross her path pay the ultimate price. Borley Rectory's restless inhabitants, 1930s, England. Deep in the desolate underbelly of England's Essex countryside, the crumbling ruins of Borley Rectory conceal one of history's most infamous hauntings, legions of tormented spirits bound to its storied grounds through centuries of sacrilegious rites and possessions. First constructed in 1863, Borley's malignant paranormal roots emerge from the twisted mysteries lingering in its protracted timeline. The earliest recorded incident dates to 1885, when the property's owner awoke to the apparition of a menacing nun hovering over his bed, staring him down with hate-filled eyes. A string of similarly inexplicable occurrences followed, household objects levitating without intervention, dense fogs pervading confined spaces, ominous Native American chants whispered from walls without any traceable origin. But Borley's darkest chapter emerged in the 1930s under paranormal researchers' scrutiny. Their arrival seemingly awakened ancient, malicious forces lurking within the rectory's hallowed halls. A pristine child's handprint seared itself onto a freshly varnished wall, smoke ascending from the implanted marking as if birthed from an unseen portal to the underworld. One night, the disembodied visage of a frail elderly man materialized beside a maid with such malice that she collapsed from the trauma. Perhaps most perplexing were the messages conveyed directly to investigators, like the Latin etchings decorating walls which translated to Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini with the chilling rejoinder "No black shirt here until Monday," an apparent forewarning of whatever restless entities that lurking in the shadows.